Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and I'm about to take you for a little tour of my farm. But unlike the early spring tour that I did earlier this year, I'm not going to show you my garden at its freshest or cleanest or nicest. I'm trying to show you my garden at its lowest point in the year. We've been through a long period of drought. The garden beds are not fresh. I've just cut back many of my roses for propagation. So if you're expecting to see my garden at its peak, no, that's not this kind of tour. What I'm actually looking for at this time of year is the projects and the design choices that will make my garden and my farm work better for the coming years, and I actually could use your help with that a little bit. I'm going to show you around, I'm going to talk about some of the changes that I'm looking to make, and obviously you'll see some roses and some of my landscape design choices already at this point, but you'll be seeing them when they're a little bit more weathered than you'd see them other times of year. But I definitely would appreciate some of your comments and feedback about some things I could do that I'm doing well, or that you don't like and you think I could do better, and some comments on my design choices that I'm discussing in the video. Let's start out here on the street, and the reason I'm doing that is because I'm trying to make my farm more functional for visitors, and this is the place where visitors would first enter my farm. We were quite fortunate to have a second driveway like this. This is a paved driveway that's basically a customer parking lot, and that came with the farm, so we didn't have to do anything to get that, and I think it works quite nicely. From the parking lot you immediately see this archway here, or this structure that leads into the forested area of the garden. And where most of our customers would come into contact with us straight away is at the sales shed here. And you can see I've taken a delivery of soil for propagation, and also I have my wood chips here, and we're using the wood chips now to freshen up the path through the wooded area of the garden, and I'll take you through that in just a second here. But this is the sales shed, and as you can see on the front there, it says that if you need us, you can ring the doorbell, which is up there, or you can call me on my cell phone, and then we'll greet you here and help you with your shopping. We were always on the fence about how much shopping we should allow on the farm here. At first we did a lot of our selling at the farmer's market, and that was the way that we'd sort of decided to make our business make sense. With the pandemic, we had to open ourselves up a lot more to on-farm pickup and on-farm selling, so people would come here, again to that sales shed, and then they would follow this little path here up towards the displays in the greenhouses where we sell our plants. But we also had an idea that it would be nice to feature some of the plants in the landscape here. So if you follow me down this path here, what you'll see is this is an area we kind of have themed as for edible plants. So if you look up here, we got a nice sized fig tree on this side here, and another fig here. This big beast up here is a raisin tree, Hovenia dulcis, and this guy here is a tunshoot tree, or Chinese mahogany, which Chinese people use in cooking around Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year's. We have gooseberries, crab apples, and so the idea was to theme this towards edible plants. There's an Italian plum, and further along there, that's a pawpaw tree. And some of the improvements we're planning in here, obviously, like I say, we're freshening up that path, but we're looking to eliminate this hazel tree. Got cut back because it was suffering from filbert blight, and so I'd like to eliminate that and turn it into some kind of feature garden in the center of the wooded area here. And I don't know quite what to do with that. I thought maybe I would do a willow structure of some sort. That might be an idea, but that has not crystallized yet. That idea hasn't come to fruit. Now, no pun intended. Here's where we've stopped freshening up the path, because I think we may change the path. Currently it goes in a loop around the garden there and then returns to that archway at the parking lot. But what I'd like it to do is spill out into the orchard there. We have some orchard trees. I'm going to walk the path that the path should probably go down. I have some orchard trees there in the front yard and some big plums in the front there. And I think that this area may actually theme better into the woodland or edible forest garden. And so just flipping around here, that's where the path, the new path, would spill out to. And I'm thinking I'd just place a couple of shrubs on either side to just indicate to people, yes, this is where the path ends, and now you can wander freely into the orchard and front area of the garden, which we're hoping to improve the overall presentation of. I showed this area off in my hydrangea video, but it's sort of a shaded garden at the front of the yard where everything has taken a bit of a beating because of a lack of moisture this summer. And so yes, it looks a little bit rough at this point, you know, with some nice little features too. That's Cassia Marilandica and a fuchsia in behind it, a hardy fuchsia, Fuchsia magellanica. And then we have some beat up hostas, but it is the Empress Wu variety, so they will have big beautiful leaves come spring. So we're trying to highlight this area, and I'd love to give the customers a pathway to come out and see this. So as I mentioned, when we place this mulch all the way down now, we're probably going to, instead of having it loop in like that there, we're probably going to push it out this entrance here into the orchard and that front fruiting area. And back now to the sales shed, I want to take you on the path that our customers would generally follow through the farm, because the issue I want to create is better flow. And you can see obviously that people could be tempted to go around the forest path that we've already explored, and then I'm going to try to improve that presentation a little bit. But the other way that they can go is directly forward towards the greenhouses. I have 4 greenhouses on the farm here. People have remarked on past videos that we kind of have some natural beauty, some I guess they call it borrowed landscape in the background, some nice mountains, and that's always a nice feature and something I can't take any responsibility for, but I'm sure happy to take advantage of. As people approach our greenhouse, and yeah, we're in kind of working mode here. We've been taking cuttings and filling trays, and generally during the growing season, this greenhouse would be our perennial greenhouse. I've consolidated the roses in here because I'd like to get everything under the same irrigation and simplify things for myself. But generally this greenhouse is over to the perennials and shrubs that you see on the right here. You can see I've got lots and lots of roses that are going into the selling season for next year, and they will probably be displayed in general in one of the next greenhouses that I'll refer to in the video here. A bunch of lavender that will end up in a lavender garden. I've just cut it back recently, but I can see that some of the shoots, some of the shoots are coming back already. So this will be going into our lavender garden that I'll be developing this year. And then the rest of what's on these benches here is all propagation. Lots and lots of roses and other perennials for going into the next selling season. And most of those will be potted up into 2-gallon roses, although some will be sold early on in the season through mail order. So following the flow, and again, do apologize for any mess that I have around here. It's a working farm. It opens up into this area here, which is kind of like the greenhouse foyer area. Don't know what to call it. Sort of the header house or staging area. This is the greenhouse we just came out of. There's a second greenhouse over here. I will be skinning that one this year, so that's one improvement that I intend to do. I'll be putting a skin on that so we can use it for further growing. I have another greenhouse over here. Sneak peek, I'll be making a video in a week or two to cover some of these miniature roses that I have in here, because I'm getting into minis. And this greenhouse that you'll see over here is generally where we would display most of our 2-gallon roses for sale during the season. Currently empty except for the peach trees at the very back there. And yes, that was just my phone going off. And then the rest of the farm. So at the front of this greenhouse, and usually when I meet customers here, one of the things they ask is, can I go out and see the roses in the field? And what's standing in my way is this big pile of rose clippings. Usually I burn them at the end of the year, but as a design choice now, I think I have to remove it. I have to get rid of the big pile of ugly that's standing in the way of my customers so that they can actually feel free to head out and see the rose field, and in the distance also the rose garden, without feeling like they're having to traipse past a big ugly mound of cut off twigs and stems and branches that later on I'll be burning. So that's what this is, and it does leave me with the question of what do I do with all of my rose stems as I cut them off of my plants in the field here, as I do my trimming and as I do my propagating. Where do I do that? I still have to think of what a good suitable place would be, but right here doesn't work. I really want to get more friendly towards hosting people on the farm here, and I think this is really standing in the way. Also over here, compost pile for the same reasons. I just don't want to have a big compost pile accumulating and being ugly where people are coming onto the farm. Maybe I'm being too sensitive, but the other thing I'm doing over here, I'm walking you over to a project. We were growing grapes here, and you can see in this case we haven't trained this one successfully up the support as well as we should have. It's kind of sprawling all over the place, and that's going to be my problem with grapes. I think grapes are a fail as far as a landscape manageable piece here. When we were growing tomatoes in this greenhouse, and we were trying to tell the story of tomatoes over here, and we had squash out this way. I'm sorry if I made you dizzy when I made that quick transition there. I just have to be more mindful of the fact that people are trying to watch this, and my hands are a little bit shaky. My gimbal wasn't working today. But when I had tomatoes in there and squash behind me, putting grapes here seemed like the next thing to do. We're trying to tell that story of edible plants. Our business has switched quite a lot because we've really focused in on the roses. It seems to be the thing that's doing the best for us, easiest to sell, and it really is where my passion is as far as what I'm trying to do in the world too. So we are going to take this area here, and I'd like to turn it into something more impressive. I could turn it into rambling roses or climbing roses. That's an option. The one nice thing about this spot, I know you probably can't see it from here, I'm going to actually swing back this way, is that it is the one spot on my farm where I actually have a little bit of elevation. And see, it actually has a slope here on this hillside, and the rest of the farm is very, very flat, which has its advantages too, but there is no advantage of that dramatic height. And sometimes when we've been out to visit other gardens, my wife has remarked upon, oh, isn't it nice that they have all these vertical features or vertical mounds or places they can plant things on a hillside, and we just don't have that here. So I'd like to find some plants to feature on here. Can be roses, could be something else that sort of accentuates that verticality without, of course, completely blocking the side of the greenhouse. So you know, I'm going to say let's stay in that sort of 6 to 8 foot range, and that would be quite a nice vertical compared to the flat rest of the farm. And you can see again in the corner here I've made another mound of yard waste, which, you know, I don't tend to mind, but this is one of the nicer views we have from our yard, is beyond the greenhouses here, going up towards the mountains there, and on a clear day you can see all the way to the Mission Abbey in the far distance there, which is a local landmark and a beautiful building. And currently I have this, which I'm going to have to deal with one way or the other. So now going to the rose field. I think the rose field explains itself very well, and I don't have much motive to change it except to let it grow in a little bit. Most of these plants have been here for a year or two, but most of them for about a year. And we've been pruning off of them to take cuttings for this coming gardening season. So it works quite well for me. It works within the function of the yard, and I think that customers accept that quite nicely, that they have these tires, which maybe are a questionable landscape choice in terms of prettiness, but they do a beautiful job of keeping the grass out from the base of the plants and allowing me a place where I can mulch and fertilize the plants quite nicely. And then, of course, the customers can come out here during the early season, before I've started to take cuttings for propagation, and they can see all of these plants coming into flower and enjoy them and see what they look like as sort of fully grown specimens, or at least specimens that are a little bit larger than what they're seeing in pots. So I'm going to give this area of the garden a pass, a check mark, and move on to show you the rose garden. So this is the rose garden, and I had videos where I showed you how I made these arches, and the whole idea of this garden is to sort of draw people from afar. It's a rounded garden. It has colorful plants in it. It looks stunning in the early spring when a lot of the old garden roses are doing their thing. And I still obviously have some bare patches that I have to deal with, but overall I'm pretty happy with how this flows into the landscape. Nice views on this side. There's not much you can see of the mountains in the distance today, but on this side of the farm it is a beautiful view of Sumas Mountain, and it goes towards the Fraser River as well. So this is kind of a nice spot, and it's working well for me. But once people come here, they kind of have a dilemma that I'm going to show you in just a moment here, which is that at the entryway to the rose garden, we've placed this area, this fenced area that we call the boulevard. Probably not the right gardening term for it, but it's basically intended to be sort of a wide approachway to the rose garden, with us envisioning that guests would be entering from the area in the front yard by our house. And so I'm going to bring you to the front of this, but ultimately this was intended to make a beautiful approach towards the rose garden. That's the way it was designed. And I think it works for that. I think people who come to visit us personally and come to our backyard, they look at this and they say, oh, that's a beautiful area, and it's very apparent to them how they should proceed through this. They walk down the center here, they look at the garden beds, which obviously are not quite so dried up and beaten up as they are today, but they see the blooming things. Sorry, speaking of blooming things, I've got Cleome here, which I like a lot as an annual, and some Agastaki, which is drooping because we had our first rain in like forever here. But this, people feel okay with this, and I've put in the posts there because I'm going to be putting up pillar roses. They're already 1 year old now and should see some significant growth on them in the next year. So ultimately it should become a very impressive approach to our main rose garden. But the dilemma for customers who are visiting our yard is they have come from that area over there, and they've sort of meandered through the rose field. They generally shortcut straight over to the rose garden over there, and then they hit this spot, and what they see heading this direction is they see our duck pen, they see our house. The kiddie pool is not usually there. So in fairness, it's not usually there. But what's happening is and this is just what I'm observing, is that people have a hesitation to continue on this direction because they're approaching our private area. And there's kind of an open blank space here, and they don't know how to proceed. It's like, oh, I better turn around, or I better head back towards the greenhouses there. And that's not the reaction we want. We actually want them to sort of take a left turn away from the house and go up towards the garden that I will be showing you in just a minute here. But that is going to become our lavender garden over there. So that's what I'm trying to encourage here, And if I have indeed decided to make a map, and I can overlay it at this point, what I want to show you is sort of the proposed bed that I want to put here that should run almost like an S and a curve that takes you from the end of this fence here and sort of directs you over and around the side of the house. This here, this trailer will be gone by then. And then we're going to get that out of the way. And then what it should do is sort of open the visitors to our farm out to this location here, which will become our lavender garden. This year we sort of donated this to my parents who moved into an apartment and wanted to have some gardening space, so we gave them some gardening space, which is now starting to powdery mildew and do what cucumbers do later in the season. And they've got lots of Swiss chard in there and some eggplants and peppers, and they've done fairly well with it, but it's reaching at the end, and we'll be putting a lavender bed in here. Now this is one other area where I wouldn't mind taking some feedback, because when we had it as a veggie garden or as a flower garden, these kind of corners here worked as a definition point. They would help. They're kind of rustic looking. They're just made out of blocks and posts and loose stacked, so they're not a problem. The problem I have with them is that people feel like they can sit on them. and they're not actually, and they don't stand up straight, so they can actually fall down and cause a little bit of a danger that way. And I don't know that they are quite formal enough for a lavender garden. So the lavender garden, the shape of that garden may actually extend a little bit. I'm going to extend it the direction of the camera, so towards me and away from me just a little bit, so this rectangle that it's in may become a little more elongated in this direction. And I'm hoping that that sort of accentuates the flow. So that's what I've been trying to focus on a little bit here, is the flow of customers, or the path of customers through the garden. If they have indeed taken the zigzag from the boulevard there and they followed the path over here to the lavender garden, I want them to more or less walk along the front of this lavender garden that we're putting in rows, and have it lead them towards that orchard over there. Now you'll remember at the very front end of the video that you can escape, or we're trying to create an escape from the woodland garden over there into the orchard area. And why are we so determined to get people over to the orchard area of the yard? Well, really it just comes down to the fact that we've done some gardening in the front yard here that our guests are never getting to see. This here is the ground cloth and the poly for that fourth greenhouse that I mentioned. That just got delivered, and so we'll be working on skinning that greenhouse shortly. So we have a few different projects on the way. But as I mentioned, one of our problems with the orchard area and the front yard is that people just don't visit it, and they don't feel welcome. And the flow of the farm sort of discourages them. If they come in off that main driveway and they're going around that loop is a loop. So it's kind of intended to contain people, or that's the way the design looks. And they have no reason to come out here. If they come from the backyard, they are basically stopped by the house and they return to the greenhouses. So I'd like to give them a reason to come up this way. And ideally, I'd even like to encourage visitors to come and cross the front driveway towards the winter garden, which we put some work in towards. And you know, one of the goals of all of this is these are supposed to be display gardens so that people can have a look at the plants, and maybe we can grow the plants, maybe we can sell the plants. But it's, you know, overall just to make a pleasant visit and some interesting things to look at. This is a new tree. I put in Japanese Stewardia in the past couple of years, and you can see it's crisped up from weeks and weeks of no rain. We've tried to irrigate when we can, but we just don't have set irrigation out here. This is the winter garden, and I've featured that in a couple of videos before, and even though I call it the winter garden, it actually looks quite good in the early spring. The hellebores are still blooming, and there's some plants here that are still quite stunning in the spring and even through the summer and fall. Got a beautiful contorted willow up on this end. I've got some roses featured in here. Korean fir, I think that one is. That's coming up on the right. And, you know, a Rosa Davidii. So what I'd love to give people an excuse to do is to come and explore our front gardens a little bit. And, you know, that may be a change in our attitude a little bit too. We used to be kind of doing this gardening a little bit for ourselves, but now that we started getting visitors here, you know, we don't mind inviting people to see what it is we're doing, what maybe they've seen in the videos, and, you know, what they can see that's of interest to them, maybe even for a purchasing point of view in the front yard. So the one last thing I'll ask your advice on, if I'm looking for feedback, is what is it that would encourage people to come from that orchard area across there, cross this driveway here, that's the main driveway to our house, and come and explore in the front yard? I know it doesn't look all that enticing right now, but I'm kind of looking for garden features, or we thought maybe defining a path across the driveway, or we thought maybe erecting an arch on either side, but we just really don't have a good answer for what would encourage people really to come from this area here over by the orchard and then proceed across the driveway to explore the front yard. Thank you so much for your attention today on what I acknowledge is a very different kind of garden tour. If you have any suggestions, I'd love to hear from you, so feel free to leave your feedback in the comments below the video.